All right, welcome back to the Homestand Show. Albert Vartanian, James Sharman, and Justin Pooney. Sharms, I was thinking about this during the break. Once your broadcast career is over and you're riding off into the sunset, I think there's a role for you, maybe in the NHL.
Oh, yeah?
A special advisor or a special assistant. What do you think about that?
Special advisor to what is the question?
I have no idea. I want to ask our next guest, Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. We're seeing special advisors and assistants being added to tons of teams. The most notably recently, Jerome McGinley, Shane Doan to the Leafs, Vincent Lecavalier with Montreal, Leclerc's with the Flyers, Patrick Sharp as well has joined that team. What does a special advisor or special assistant actually do?
Well, I think it varies across those teams. I mean, obviously that there's sort of individualized portfolios, but really, look, you're leaning on the experience those men had predominantly as NHL players, and they're another set of eyes for the front office. I think they're a sounding board, perhaps when you're working through trade discussions or big decisions organizationally. And I think in all of the cases, there's at least the possibility that it grows into something more, depending on how that individual takes to the job. Jason Spezza last season in Toronto was a special advisor to Kyle Dubas, and then he's just been hired as the assistant general manager in Pittsburgh because he really liked the work and he was not a part-time worker in any case. So the problem for James in doing the job is that he didn't play in the NHL, and so I think that tends to be the criteria that you need.
I don't think so. I've watched lots of hockey over recent years. I'm an unblinkered Leaf fan, so I think I do a great job actually. Yeah, get me in that room. I'll sort them out, those boys.
All right,
CJ. There's so much speculation about this being a busy time trade-wise. I know you're working the phones. Is this partly because the UFA class is so weak this year?
I think so. I think there's a couple factors at play. I mean, if you think back to the trade deadline, we saw a lot more action in that period than I would say we typically do. Some bigger deals, a lot of teams taking swings on players. And I sort of feel like it's a continuation of that. And then on top of it, you have a salary cap that's not going to go up, likely not more than $1 million. And so I think teams have to get creative because some of these trades are about, removing a salary or a cap hit from a team's books. And then finally, if you're looking to improve, with due respect to the free agents, I do think there are some good players among those that will be free to sign anywhere come July 1st, but there's no headliner at this point in time. I wouldn't say, certainly not a lot of frontline players. And then you look at a trade market with, Alex DeBrincat, who scored a couple 40 goal seasons in his career and is still just hitting his mid-20s, or Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, those are two guys that we know are going to move. He's a 24, soon to be 25-year-old centerman. There's just not players of that class on the free agent market. And so I think that's what leads the trade talk to be very real right now. And I think it's going to be a busy period through the draft at the end of the month.
CJ, the Vegas Golden Knights, of course, just won the Stanley Cup, and they had one draft pick on their roster. Of course, they've used their draft picks as, chips to acquire, different assets. Do you see the NHL kind of moving away from teams hoarding draft picks and building through the draft, and now just using them to, like we mentioned, acquire established players and build out your roster that way?
Certainly seems like the best teams are of that mind right now. I mean, we saw, I don't even remember the numbers, 10 or 11 first-round picks that were traded in that window before the trade deadline. Like, that's way more than we would typically see. More teams kind of going in to get some certainty today in terms of impact players and trading out the uncertainty of what those picks might be. I don't know that we're ever going to get away from when you have a talent like Connor Bedard in the draft. That's going to be its own incentive for some teams to finish at the bottom because you're probably not finding a Connor Bedard anywhere, but with the first overall draft pick for his whole career. I mean, Chicago is going to draft him first overall here, and that they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that he's a member of their organization until he's ready to retire. But beyond that point, I do think that there's a little more willingness to trade those picks. We've seen some of them flip twice, and I like it. I like an aggressive NHL, and we usually look at the Stanley Cup champion and say, what are teams going to copy? I hope that they copy the fact that the Golden Knights have been like unrelenting in building and rebuilding and reshaping and remaking their roster. They traded the Nick Suzuki as a prospect to Montreal to get Max Pacioretty. Then they eventually had to trade Max Pacioretty for nothing because they needed the cap space. I mean, that's probably, all things considered, not a great use of your assets, but it's worked for them, right? I mean, because they've been creative and they've had a lot of hits in other places. And I think that Vegas can now be a model that should lead to more transactions. And that's, I think, good for the entertainment value of the sport. And I think, it could lead for a more interesting NHL than we've had maybe in years gone by.
Chris, speaking of Vegas, when it comes to trade destinations in the NHL, from what you know, who's at the top of that list? I'm assuming Vegas has to be one of those teams.
Yeah, you start with good climates, good ownership, teams that have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, and then favorable tax situations. And there's a few of them around the U.S., right? I think Tampa's been near the top of that list, as Jeff Vinik, their owner's widely viewed probably as the best owner in the game. And, they have a nice place to live. They're in the cup mix every year. Vegas would be there. I think the Dallas Stars, maybe a little more under the radar, but are a pretty popular destination. I know Nashville's a place a lot of players have come to want to play, but each individual player is going to have his own reasons. I mentioned Alex DeBrincat before. I mean, he's a Michigan boy. And so he's given the Senators a list of teams in which he's willing to sign an extension with. One of the teams is the Detroit Red Wings, because that's sort of his childhood team, or it's near, friends and family back home. And so, it's some of those destinations like a Vegas, Tampa, the ones I mentioned, the warmer weather clients, I think have some advantages, but it doesn't mean that every single player in the league wants to go there. And believe it or not, there's the odd Canadian who likes the idea of coming and playing for one of his hometown teams, or in the markets where, maybe you don't get those tax advantages and you got to deal with a little bit more of a nuisance when you go grocery shopping or whatever in your day.
CJ, of course, the New Jersey Devils had a breakout year this year. Jack Hughes signed an 8-year extension. Jesper Bratt just signed an 8-year extension. Now, apparently, Timo Meier wants an 8-year extension in New Jersey. We're talking about destinations. Is New Jersey becoming a destination market in the NHL?
I think that's fair. I really do. And it's funny because you go back 3 or 4 years, they weren't able to sign Taylor Hall and ultimately traded him. It was, it looked like it was going in the other direction. But, for all the other things I mentioned, the one thing most players want is a chance to win. And it would be hard to view last year in New Jersey, and you just look at the age of their important players, the fact that they are locked in long-term, and not say that this team is going to have multiple chances to raise the Stanley Cup in the next, it could be 3 to 5 years. It could be next year. I don't have a crystal ball in that way, but if you're a free agent or you're someone like Timo Meier who got traded to New Jersey and got to see it firsthand, I do think that they are a team that now has more appeal. And that is the beauty. I mean, Chicago probably isn't a place many people want to play. Well, once they get Bedard, and if they put some good players around them, all of a sudden we're going to talk about free agents wanting to go there. I think that, as I say, there's individual reasons to want to go places that maybe some, want somewhere over somewhere else. But, at the end of the day, I think most players want to sign a long-term contract, make as much money as they can, and guarantee themselves they're going to be playing important games, because as much as the money is nice, if you're not having a chance to compete for a championship, it's not nearly as fun.
Pivoting to the Leafs here, I mean, you talk about, success or lack of success and moving forward and cap space. The Leafs also reportedly treat their players better than most teams as well. Does that put them at the very top of the destination for many players?
I think it does. I mean, look, there's some trepidation too about Toronto because it is such a white hot hockey market. It's not for everybody. I think some players come here like William Nylander, and it's a perfect fit for him. He's the sort of guy that I think he just goes about his business. He enjoys being a member of the Maple Leafs, but I don't think any of the sort of media speculation or all the fan stuff gets him down or affects his day at all. Whereas others, can't escape that. But, from a standpoint of, what they do off the ice, from everything from sort of sports science to nutrition to the way they rehab injuries, and even, getting a family acclimated to the city when there's, say, a trade midseason or something like that. I mean, the Leafs, you don't hear one player that's played around the league, say anything negative about those things. I think they've invested a lot of money in the areas they can that aren't the salary cap to try to get incremental advantages to be a first-class organization. And, those things do certainly hold appeal when players get here. Luke Schenn came at the trade deadline and absolutely loved his second go-round in Toronto. And, he's due still for unrestricted free agency on July 1st, but would like to stay, not just because of the off-ice stuff, but I think that certainly doesn't hurt.
Speaking of Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets, CJ, the buyout window in the NHL opened today for the Leafs. Is there an expectation that they'll end up buying out Matt Murray?
I don't know if I'd say it's an expectation. I think that what they do with Matt Murray is still an open question. For every team looking for a buyout, I mean, you'd rather try to trade a contract away than eat a buyout. It obviously is the double of the amount of time remaining on the deal is when you incur a cap charge. And so in Matt Murray's case, he's got 1 season left on his deal. Unfortunately for the Leafs, it's backloaded in terms of it's a lot of money, more money in actual dollars than is on his cap hit. And so if they were to buy him out, they're going to have 2 years of a cap charge. And so I think it's certainly a possibility, something they're going to have to consider. But they've still got a couple weeks to see if they can make a deal. And we've seen these trades in the past. I mean, they were in a similar spot where the Leafs with Peter Mrazek last year, and they found a taker at the draft in the Chicago Blackhawks to take on his contract. And they only had to move down 15 or 20 draft spots. I can't remember the exact number, but not too far in order to get that deal. And so, it's sort of a strange market for goaltenders, I would say, this offseason. There's not a lot of UFA quality. You have Tristan Jarry, you have Aiden Hill coming off the Stanley Cup win. Freddie Anderson's there. He's got some questions about his health with the way he's been in recent years. So, never say never that there's a trade to materialize. But if not, I mean, certainly I think the Leafs have to at least consider strongly the possibility of buying out Murray.
Chris, on your latest article on NorthStar Bets, you mentioned a few teams that could be active movers and dealers come the offseason: the Colorado Avalanche, Carolina Hurricanes. When you look at the landscape of the NHL, which teams you feel will be the most active, and will my Canucks be one of them?
Just ask about the Canucks. Just be.
Yeah, let's cut to the chase. This question's about Vancouver. I mean, look, they want to be active. I think the issue for the Canucks has been the issue that they've dealt with the last couple of years, is they don't have a lot of space under the salary cap to be adding players without subtracting some. And so the activity the Canucks are going to look at is trying to remove some contracts from the books. That might be accompanied by more additions. But that's the first goal here. And so you wonder, as we get into this buyout period, do they look at a buyout? I mean, they have, several candidates in my mind where that might make sense. Someone like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, perhaps, maybe Connor Garland, although I'm sure they'd prefer to trade someone like him at his age. Maybe Tyler Myers. I mean, the Canucks are still in a mode where they have to get rid of money off the books before they can be the kind of players they want to be. I mean, obviously it's a big summer with the ability to extend Elias Pettersson. And so, they've got to be removing before adding. And that's the issue there. I mean, there's other similar teams. Boston had such a great season last year until the first round of the playoffs, but spectacular regular season that they don't have much money to maneuver either. They're a team that's having to consider buyouts. Someone like Mike Riley, I think, is a strong candidate, but also, potentially moving out some players. And so I think the most active teams are the ones with cap space. That's why I highlighted Colorado, for example, because, they know they're not going to have Gabriel Landeskog all season. He's had a surgery that's going to take him out, and they might lose JT Compher, who was a top 6 forward for them last year, to free agency. And so they're in a position, I think, that they can be quite aggressive in adding at the forward position, and they have the cap space to do it. And so, it's kind of the name of the game. You need cap space to be able to really execute a lot of these moves. And so I look for those teams that have the most flexibility in that regard.
CJ, as always, thanks for doing this, man. Appreciate it.
I love it, guys. Going to be a busy week.
Yes, thank you so much. That's Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets, our NHL insider. Lots to talk about. You got your Canucks.
You okay there, Justin? Yeah,
I kind of figured he was going to say that. Yeah. How can a team that missed the playoffs be over the cap? Well, only the Canucks.
Yeah, I want to hit him with some free agent stuff with the Leafs and Keefe, but another time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure a lot of news are going to drop from now until at least July 1st. A lot to happen with the Leafs, I think.
It's going to be a crazy week.
Yeah. Okay. Coming up after the break, I think it's time to wrap up the show. No McCormick's Minute, but we'll banter around and see.
We'll figure out something.
Something.